Hello, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. My name is Nuha Eltinay. I'm an urban planner, architect, PhD researcher, just started 1 month ago, so I'm very confident bringing up my slides in here, but I would really appreciate your feedback and comments into that. Also previously worked for an NGO called the Arab Urban Development Institute. We're a regional network, hopefully implementing projects in Sudan. Some projects took place previously, but I won't say that much successful, so hopefully better futures to come. For my presentation today, I've put in that big title, Reporting from the Front, but actually this is not the main title for my topic, and I'm going to tell a small story about it maybe later on for the presentation. But the main point that I'm going to speak about for today is climate change, conflict and displacement, disaster risk reduction in Sudan. Now, thinking about these, I would say, three main keywords: climate change, the impact of climate change on urban livelihood and natural biodiversity systems have been really observed worldwide. A huge amount of, I would say, huge number of people have been dying each and every day, and these numbers are just increasing. We're speaking about assets, like financial assets and human lives that have been taken, but due to the lack of the management, it's not that we do not have strategies, we do not have policies, but are we actually implementing it in the appropriate way? Putting into that context of climate change, it automatically generates disasters, but when I speak about disasters, there are two elements that we need to understand. The first point are the hazards that are causing the disasters, and the second element is actually the vulnerability to those disasters, because that's what makes the disaster worse. So if we manage to reduce the level of vulnerability, automatically, I would say, we reach into better standards of resilience to disasters. So if flooding would cause, I would say, in Sudan, for example, in 2013 only, the amount of people who lost their lives because of flooding was 3 million. So that number could be reduced if we just, yes, yes, absolutely. I'll come into the figures in a second. So these figures could be reduced if we improved the level of resilience. Now, into the context of conflict and displacement, all of these are elements coming in together and increasing the issues of climate change and natural disasters. Before coming into the details of that presentation, the first question that comes into our mind is, who are we speaking about? Who are the population that we are targeting, and who are the beneficiaries of this research? It's the displaced community. But what does the word displaced mean? And I'm putting the context into context in red color place, because I'm going to focus on to the urban context of displacement, not only the social perspective that's always taken by humanitarian aid agencies. So the word displaced takes us into a definition of, sometimes we call them internally displaced populations, so that's IDPs, and sometimes it goes into DPs only, so displaced people. In both contexts, are they refugees, are they internally displaced? The only difference that we have that if they are crossing international borders, they're refugees. If they're within the country, they're internally displaced. But in all cases, they are forced, obliged to leave places of habitual residence, so places they live, they grow in, they have been going to schools, working, so it's in turn an entire life that have been taken away from them, forced to leave these places, whether through armed conflicts, that's why it's conflict, or whether through human and man-made disaster, that's why it's climate change. Now, I'm going to focus only on internally displaced population. The question would be, why am I doing this? Why am I not speaking about displaced people or persons in general? The reason why I'm saying this, it goes back into, I would say, evidence-based studies. The Overseas Development Institute, in their report for 2015, have came up with three main statements. The first statement is the record number of people are now displaced from their homes for years on end. They looked into huge figures, 59.5, and that's global displacement.
Can you use the pointer, please?
14.
Yeah, we went
there you go
over the
there.
hands. Fantastic.
Okay,
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that is a global perspective, but we are looking at least 3 years, so these figures are more and more. Again, another figure that could show displacement, how is it working, and the number of the refugees. It's more than the population of Greece, so obviously that's why Greece could not accommodate the influx of the refugees, because obviously it is huge. The second, and I think that's the most important one, are the most displaced people. They don't leave their countries, they are staying in those countries. So that's why we don't really need always, when I speak about displacement, to consider refugees. We need to go and look into our countries, what's going on within those countries. And interestingly, we've got Syria, Iraq, Somalia, and Sudan being the, I would say, top of the list when it comes into internal displacement. Again, another figure showing the percentage of displaced people who are internally displaced, comparison between 1989 and 2014. And point number 3, again, highlighting the same countries, adding Colombia in here, Palestine, Sudan, and Iraq. So most people are displaced for a very small number of countries. So we are contributing dramatically into the issue of internal displacement, I would say global internal displacement. 75% of displaced people come from 11, and only 5 countries are sharing 50% of that figure. This is huge. Now, where am I going to do that study, and what am I focusing on? That's where it takes me to the second slide, which is Sudan. Now, I've been questioned by my supervisor, is that you cannot pick a country that you are from just because of the pride of it, but unfortunately, Sudan is just, when I look into it, it's an entire continent. When I just look into the issue of displacement, am I going to pick up the north, am I going to pick up the south? It's just fascinating. I must say fascinating is not something to be proud of, the amount of conflict and issues that are taking place, but what brings the pride actually is the resilience of those communities. The Sudanese people form this huge, I would say, history of conflict and issues, and we are still surviving. Interestingly, if I look into North Sudan and the huge displacement of people with the dam, or is it Darfur and the conflict that's going and taking place there, some figures from the UN offices in 2015 brought up a figure of 3,100,000 people displaced only from Darfur and the Blue Nile conflict. So, Eastern Front, it's not really that mentioned in the news, but there are some tensions taking place there, and it's not considered. I've already brought that into the topic. South Sudan, with the separation and that new nation that came into life 5 years ago, and unfortunately, the ongoing conflict that took place before their separation have never disappeared. The problem was there, and the roots are there. That's why it has been triggered December 2015. Last month, and it's going to go on, and unfortunately worse. ABA, no figures, unfortunately. It mentions the displacement out of ABA, but nobody knows where those people are going. So, from that point of view, with all of these dilemmas, I think that it's very important to bring into the topic the history of Sudan. I'm not doing this just for the sake of the research. I have to be very honest. I was so proud to look into the history of a country which I was born out of Sudan, brought up out of Sudan, so it was the first time for me ever to go through the history and really share that pride with you today. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. For those people, I think it's very important to see how this issue have been going on for such a long time, and that's the timeline for the development of this country, Sudan. Starting with the Kingdom of Kush, and then moving from that into the kingdoms of the Nile and the Nubians, and then how did that go into the Islamization, and speaking about the Ottoman period, and then from that perspective going into the 19th century, the development of the modern Sudan, I would say, in the 1965, having the independence, and then going through this very, I would say, I don't like to go through politics, but it's just fascinating having all of these people involved in such a very short period of time. From there, conflict takes place, I would say, into a very strong impact on the country, having this and ending up with the separation of a country into 2 parts. With that separation, I think we cannot ignore conflict when I speak about disaster risk reduction. But in order to help those people who are displaced, I have to look into the demographic changes that took place within the country itself. With a recent figure of 2015 and a population of Sudan, looking into the percentage or the balance between males and females, I actually compared that into the world total population and taking it more into an urban perspective. So I started looking into this big figure. How are these people accommodated within the urban context? We cannot actually depend on the numbers that I brought earlier, with the number of the displaced refugees or the number of the people who lost their lives in floods. The reason why I'm saying that we cannot depend on those numbers, because some of them are registered through people who are shifted into the camps, so whether it's through the World Food Programme, when you get to have your cash and you get to have your food on the camp, you get to register, so automatically they get to get those figures and numbers. But other people don't go to camps, they shift into cities, urban centres. That's why my focus is going to be on urban resilience. So by looking into density, we have almost 23 per kilometre, so that's 60 people per metre. And then going into the total land or the total area that we have and the percentage of urbanisation. Now that percentage of urbanisation might not be very clear, how was it calculated, but if I compare it into the UN figures or estimations for a level of urbanisation is going to increase of 70%, that's a global by 2050, you would imagine that Sudan have reached almost half, and that's 2016. So this is a huge challenge. The IDPs, the internally displaced populations, moving into the city centres, how are they accommodated? Where are they going to be accommodated? And do we have the resources to help these people survive? Now, back to my three main keywords: climate change, conflict and displacement. Okay, people are shifting from one place to the other, but unfortunately they are shifting into disaster-prone areas. So when they go, for example, into Khartoum, they're not going to be accommodated in planned areas. Unfortunately, not all areas are well planned by the actual national, I would say, or the local government system, but at least they are actually accommodated in flood-prone areas. They are accommodated into river corridors, so areas that when the rain comes in, they are the first people to be flushed away, and they are the first people to be really hit by that very strong disaster. From that point of view, I looked into two different resources. Both of them goes back to the World Bank Group. The first one is the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the second one, which is here, is Prevention Web. I would recommend that you go into this one. They have a very nice and interactive tool. It's called Think Hazard. If you just Google it, it will come in. You just type in Sudan, and automatically it brings in the map of Sudan, and it takes you into a very nice classification, not only for these four hazards that I'm bringing here, but it actually shows, for the first time ever, I've never heard about volcanoes taking place in Sudan. I've seen it on that map, interestingly. So what it shows here on the different maps, the first one, the river floods, so I can definitely assure, by the way, the red colours shows into the high severity, and then it goes less into orange and yellow, so that's high, low, and medium and low. Water scarcity, that's definitely something that we know very well about, speaking about droughts. Volcanoes, so here, it's mainly on the northern part of the country, and earthquakes are severely along the Red Sea. But the question is, it's nice to see this classification, the different types of hazards that we have, but the frequency of the hazard is what we are targeting. Because if an earthquake would happen every 1 million years, that means that it's not a big issue to deal with. What is my priority? What is really affecting the communities? It's flooding, because the level of frequency shows 73.2% is only for floods. And then from there, if we look into the capital stock and the absolute, I would say, $1 million that are spent here in compared to the earthquakes, that means that the share is dramatic for flooding only. So that's the second element of focus, which is floods, how to mitigate the impact of floods through disaster risk reduction. Okay, floods are happening, people are shifting from one place to the other, but when they shift, conflict triggers again. because they are moving into places that are not actually well set, well prepared to accommodate them, very minimum amount of resources, so there is a lot of tension that's going to take place, and that's why conflict will continue in South Sudan unless we build up a very clear strategic plan for disaster mitigation that speaks about pre- and post-disaster. And it's not only South Sudan, it's North Sudan that is also affected, because people are moving into the city centres, they are moving into Khartoum, and Khartoum cannot accommodate everyone, because actually it is not accommodating its actual residents. Now, these are the IDPs. How are these people facing all of these challenges? Challenges that we have are economic challenges, cultural challenges. Are they actually accepted within our communities? Social, do they keep into their social ties? Do they have any civil rights, political rights, food, medicine, shelter? Some people might argue that yes, food and shelter are provided by humanitarian aid agencies. Yes, I would say that's fine, but for how long is that really making these people survive? Is it really for a long term? Is that enough? Is that what these people are looking for? No, they are looking into a bigger perspective of resilience, and that's what we call urban resilience. They would like to see their communities and their neighborhood survive and being rehabilitated and life coming back again. From that perspective, I would come into my last slide of how to do that. Challenging, I would say, but by the end, there are definitely opportunities that comes out from challenges. The Sindai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction have been adopted by the international community. That was in the 18th of March 2015 in Sindai, Japan. That framework aims to, number one, develop what we call global preparedness to disasters, come up with better collaboration at a national level. So if a disaster happens, floods affecting Sudan, it's going to be affecting other countries surrounding Sudan as well, and different cities within the country itself. So we have to have this bigger network. The third element, and the most important element that Sindai is targeting, is reconstruction, rehabilitation, and what we call building back better. But unfortunately, Sindai did not mention conflict as a disaster. They did consider natural disasters, but conflict was not, I would say, absolutely mentioned or strictly in a very clear way. From that perspective, I believe that it's very important to include the IDPs in our strategies. We have to go into better partnership. Going back into the point that have been mentioned by Rudaina earlier, it's a bottom-up approach. We need to go and see what are the needs for those communities, what are the problems they are facing, and how can we accommodate those problems. And that takes me back into what was the title about, reporting from the front. This is actually the title of the Venice Biennale. That was the competition of the Venice Biennale that took place June 2016. That was 1 month ago in Venice, and it was a group of us, I would say, the diaspora, young diasporas, so architects and planners who came up from different parts of Sudan. They came together virtually just to bring up the voice of the IDPs to the international community, speak about their problems, and to what extent can they have an impact on city planning. We're not speaking about social problems or economic problems or providing them with food and shelter only. No, we would like to transfer these slum areas and these informal settlements, they are actually based there, into better places to survive. They're actually there. So why can't we provide them with that very, I would say, very, very minor tweaks here and there, with the support of the humanitarian aid? We're not asking for anything from the local government, because literally they're not going to give us anything. But we need to transform that approach from emergency into sustainable development. Thank you.